And I also have the privilege of introducing a real leader in innovation, our next speaker, Scott Jackson. Scott serves as the president and CEO of Global Impact, an organization dedicated to growing global philanthropy and building partnerships and resources for the world's most vulnerable people. He's worked in more than 60 countries, so he's got a little more work to do, apparently, in leadership roles in the public, private, and nonprofit sectors, and was a founding member of Bono's One campaign to make poverty history. Please join me in welcoming Scott Jackson.
Thank you. Hello, my friend. Good to see you. Well, thank you so much for having me today. I am honored because I have followed Opportunity International's work for some time, including when I was at World Vision with some of you in the room, including the Crosbys. And I've been able to follow Atul Tandon from World Vision on. And I just think that all of you are here at a very unique moment in time, and that you as a community are a unique community. Global Impact is a partner of yours. We help to raise funds in employee giving and workplace giving and traditional and non-traditional workplace giving campaigns. We are honored to do that role. But today, what I wanted to do is talk a little bit about the problem that you're trying to make sure that you have an impact on, eradicating extreme poverty, and a little bit about the progress that's been made. And secondly is the role of philanthropy, and I think the role of a community of philanthropists that are represented by Opportunity International. And finally, I think the unique role that Opportunity International and this community can play in solving this problem. So let me start by defining the problem. This is an uncertain time. And maybe there have been other uncertain times, such as when the world began to wake up and think about the pandemic of HIV/AIDS. But we are living in an uncertain times in which more people are without a home, are refugees than any time in our history. We're living at a time in which we have more than 18 different wars going on across the planet, and some of them have been going on for 17 years. We live in a time in which we have great division. We have hunger, famine, marginalized communities, and disasters. But in that context, I think it's so important to think about one of the really critical problems of our time that we've not only made progress on, but can do a lot in these uncertain times. And that's really looking at what we can do with extreme poverty. You know these numbers better than I do, but now we're just under 800 million people living below the international poverty line as defined by $1.90 a day. And where they live and what they do is very interesting. So 80% are still in rural communities, 64% work in some form of agriculture. This is fascinating to me. 40% are 14 years old or younger. That's a scary place to be as a young person, to not have the ability to have economic empowerment. And as you can see, still close to 40% have no formal education and means of education. But there's a guidepost, there's a framework that the world has adopted. And part of the reason for that is because of the success of organizations like Opportunity International. And that guidepost or a set of guiding principles or framework is what's now called the Global Development Goals for Sustainability. And in some ways, I think the Global Development Goals are just as powerful as the word sustainability, because 194 countries agreed to these goals, and they have 164 targets. So across these 17 big goals, there's all these more detailed targets. And one of the interesting things is that it's a legacy of the Millennium Development Goals. And the most successful Millennium Development Goal was having the number of people who were in extreme poverty. As we look ahead, Opportunity International, of course, plays a critical role in goals 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 8, 10. But I think it's so important that all of us understand that the United Nations sees, number one, eradicating poverty as one of the three umbrellas, eradicating poverty, gender equity, and the environment, as kind of the overall umbrella of these 17 goals. But probably even most important is that the Director General sees eradicating poverty as absolutely essential. If you don't have a job and you don't have access to education, the chances of you being able to solve some of these problems and be part of your own solution are much less likely. We want to recognize some success that we've already had in the last 10 to 15 years because it offers a message of hope. It also offers a way to look at the lens of what Opportunity International has not only achieved but contributed to. And so let me share with you a little bit about the trends in extreme poverty. So extreme poverty, again, it's been halved between 1990 and 2013. So we've gone from 1.7 billion people in 1999 to, again, just under 800 million in 2013. And the drop in the global poverty rate has been 28% in 1999 to 11% in 2013. That's really fantastic. The world attained the first MDG target to cut the 1990 poverty rate in half by 2015, 5 years ahead of schedule. So this is a goal that can be achieved. I think it's important to also give you a sense of some of the other progress that eliminating severe poverty and providing economic empowerment helps to encourage. This progress report was just published as part of the second anniversary of the Global Development Goals. And you can see in 2015, 10% of the world's workers and their families were living on less than 190, and now we're down to 11% of the world instead of 28%. The proportion of population suffering from hunger declined significantly from 15 to 11%. And maternal mortality rates declined by 44%. Mortality rate of children under 5 has fallen by half. And the number of children who die from preventable diseases has gone from 10 million to 5 million a year. Between 2011 and 2014, the proportion of the world's adult education with an account at a financial institution or mobile money service increased from 51% to 62%, meaning that 700 million adults became account holders during this period. Opportunity International's numbers, I'll talk about in a minute, you have played such a significant role in this progress. So where do we go from here? What's the opportunity ahead for the world as well as for the organization? I want to share a little bit about the philanthropic landscape. So in 2016, giving by individuals, foundations, corporations, all forms of private philanthropy reached its all-time high for the third consecutive year, now coming out of the recession period. It's estimated to be at roughly about $390 billion. But what's interesting about that number is what it's made up of. So in 2014, the United States private giving, beginning with donors in this room, to developing countries outpaced the United States government all forms of developing country assistance, all forms, not just development assistance, by $10.8 billion, and has continued to outperform. And so literally giving to developing countries, private giving is at $43.9 billion, and U.S. government giving is now at $33.1 billion. And you'll see here the makeup. The faith-based community is across this entire pie chart. And organizations like Opportunity International are leading the way in programs and in funding and in impact. And we've had a number of different interesting new trends or building on previous trends. Individual donors, for example, continue to be the major engine here, even though corporate funding has increased, other forms of funding has increased. 80% of giving comes from individuals like you. Corporate giving is increasing and becoming more intentional. Giving to international causes is now second only to animal welfare. Giving on an issue-based, looking at how you eradicate poverty, how you look at the global goals is becoming very attractive. Collaborative fundraising, working together like Red Nose Day. Millennials, one of the issues that millennials must, i.e. any young worker, think about is how can they connect their own story, their own engagement to their work and to their giving. Donor advance funds and other forms of giving like impact funds, program-related funds, all are becoming important to look at. And then finally, every public sector, every government, every major institution, foundation, like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, now is looking at the private sector and individual donors like you as the key partner to leveraging their funds to solve these problems. So private philanthropy is no longer an extra. Private philanthropy is the game. I want to share with you, I know I don't have a lot of time, but I want to share with you in just a minute or two a little bit on a more personal level. Most recently, I had a book published, and the book is entitled Take Me With You. My mother was an abused spouse, and every day when she would try to escape, I would say to her, take me with you. And one day she did, and we left our home in Kansas City, and she then fell in love with a Black Baptist minister named Jefferson Jackson. And they married, not in Kansas, because you couldn't marry in Kansas that year, 1968, but in Nebraska. But all heck broke loose. There was a custody battle, and we were losing. And so we had to escape if we wanted to stay together. And we left for Vancouver, British Columbia. Without work permits, finally had to make our way down to a place called Sequim, Washington. And how we got there, on a ferry boat, a gentleman, I'm sure he was an angel, came up to us with a hat, a feather in his cap. He looked at us with these maps. My mother had a poodle in her purse that Jefferson had given her. I was always shaking my head at these things. And he said, you people ought to think about this place called Sequim, Washington. People from all over the world are moving there, retiring there, and they would accept you. And sure enough, we got off the ferry boat at the far outer reaches of the state of Washington and the United States border, and had a hard time getting a taxi in a hotel, better than Kansas. But then we made our way to Sequim, Washington, hit out on a horse ranch, and eventually they found us in the school system and took me back by armed escort to Kansas. I then eventually ran away and took a knit hat with $20 bills sewn in it that my mother had a woman from the church in Sequim quickly sew for me and give me at the detention home, as well as a Bible with phone numbers across the country. And I made my way through a Kansas snowstorm back to Jefferson and Sydney. And from there, I was able to have a job at a local Southwoods that was called General Store. I was able to have an amazing education. And without the love and the notion that what everyone else around me did, the other, I would not have chosen the Charity Within. Years later, I was with World Vision in northern Uganda. Many of you have been to that part of the world when the Lord's Liberation Army was active. And the night walkers sometimes would be in the thousands. And one night, we were surrounded, a group of us. World Vision had an amazing women's rehabilitation center there for women who were disarmed and dismembered from the war and their children. But essentially, we were walking with the night walkers, and there were thousands around us. It was a bit scary. And all of a sudden, I felt this hand, if you will. And so I reached down, and a little girl looked up and said, "My name is Rose. take me with you. I tell you that story because we have got to get personal here. We have got to look at setting a course forward that includes each and every one of our individual stories. And how do we connect that to Opportunity International? It's not just an organization, it's a cause. And what are we going to then do about it, and what are we going to achieve? Look at what you've already achieved to date. It's amazing. This is the kind of dashboard that any organization in the world would be proud of, that God is proud of. But when you look forward, I think your work has just begun. You have built an undeniable legacy, but you also have been a leader in financial solutions, not just settling on one model, but being willing to be a leader in the whole continuum of bringing economic empowerment and education to people that wouldn't have it otherwise. And you're poised to reach many of the poorest communities in the world, including in Africa and in South America. And you have not only an amazing board, an amazing community of donors, but you also have an amazing new leader who has his own story to tell, who comes in alignment with understanding what economic empowerment can do for the world, for countries, and for individuals like the men and women we saw in the video. As we look ahead, we think about the person who gave us our own first opportunity. For me, it was Jefferson and Sidney. And we think about the people that have believed in us and helped to make our dreams possible. And then I think we want to say, let's take that journey, what each of us have already done and been through and understood, and what others have done for us, and let's choose the charity within, and let's take that to Opportunity International. Because what the numbers tell us is not just that we can achieve this goal of eliminating extreme poverty, but what they tell us is that without the commitment of individual donors like you and coming around this amazing organization, Opportunity International, we actually have no chance of making this goal. We have to do it with private philanthropy. So I want to thank you for what you've already done in the world, and I want to really thank you for what you're going to do next.